Assalamu alaikum, dear audience. In mid the expert session of developing Bangladesh, we usually listen from an international expert on a very specific issue. Today, I am very delighted to host Dr. Karandeep Singh. He is founder of ROAR India, and he is working with the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations during last couple of years. Today, we will be listening how education could make sustainable. Today, we are working with education everywhere. Lots of branches of education are there. A local medium, English medium, local version, English version, some of madrasa education, technical education, vocational education, general line education, higher study, tertiary level education, business education, science education. But how this education could make career-oriented, career-focused, how to ensure the sustainability of education. Today, we will be listening in details from our resource person, Dr. Karandeep Singh. So before further I do, I would like to humbly request you, sir, could you please introduce yourself with me and my audience?
Thank you, Mr. John Ellen. Thank you for inviting me into this series. And first of all, I would like to congratulate you on developing this series and bringing different experts to talk about different elements. So, just to take you through my journey, see, I have been associated with primarily working in the education industry, but it has also been a mix of working with corporate education, and it has eventually turned into working with international bodies like United Nations and national Indian bodies like National Institute of Transforming India, which is called NITI Aayog. I did my master's from Oxford University, after which I did my post graduation in medical education from Harvard back in Boston, Massachusetts, and before getting into education full time, I did my postgraduate teacher training from Cambridge. I have been working with the Cambridge IGCSE and Cambridge University Board almost for now 8 years in different positions. Apart from that, I've been working as a principal director to different K-12 segments. From the K-12 segment, I've made my transition to edtechs. I've had the opportunity to start at least 2 to 3, edtech companies in India's IT hub back in Bangalore. And recently, after completing my PhD, I've also started working in colleges and universities with MBA students, primarily business being my forte, and entrepreneurship actually being my area of expertise. So I am also currently involved in a similar role of a similar capacity. And what I would like to point out today, actually, which is very critical, as you mentioned, is I have been representing India as an ambassador to the United Nations for the Sustainable Development Goals. And I've gotten this opportunity to do this through NITI Aayog, which is a central government body. And especially for most of the developing nations like ours, India, or Bangladesh, Pakistan, Afghanistan, most of the Southeast Asian countries, there's a lot of focus now on obviously the factor that we are trying to achieve these sustainable development goals. There's 17 of them by 2030, because they're all actually interestingly interlinked. And as we discuss forward, I will take you through them. And my mission has been now, along with the international ambassadors across the world, to how do we rather bring this sustainability into schools and colleges and into the curriculum, so that students can actually study it parallelly, in a transdisciplinary way with the curriculum that they follow. It doesn't matter which curriculum they follow or syllabi. This is something that we realize is very critical, because you know uh, at the rate at which the climate change is happening, these are the children who are going to be our leaders for tomorrow. So if we are not able to educate them on how to face, let's say, the next 10 years, it's going to be a challenge for them. And of course, it's not their fault. I should always put this disclaimer, in any interview or session, that the climate problem or the environmental problem is a product of the last 40 years, but it is going to be our this generation and the next 10 years, which is probably going to have to take the burden of fixing it. So it's our responsibility as educators to try and bring them the right kind of tools to face next decade. So that's more or less my profile. I would be happy to share more details about it as we go along in our discussion.
Thank you very much, sir. It's very humble, precise, but to the point introduction. So, actually, the global leaders set the Millennium Development Goal in the year 2000 up to 2015. Countries, developing countries or least developed countries, they fight, and of course, we have achieved lots of things from the Millennium Development Goal. Now, from 2016 to 2030, the global leaders again go for sustainable development goal, because development itself will be worthless if we cannot ensure the sustainability, if we cannot protect the environment, if we
Absolutely.
cannot protect the environment, if we cannot protect the earth, the planet we are living in, if climate change.
You're absolutely
So in such a condition, while we are discussing with too many educational faculties, too many educational background, too many classification, but sustainability should be the common subject everywhere, because each of us are responsible up to a certain level for protecting the environment. So the awareness should be made, the educational qualification and every other faculties of education is useless if the planet will not be sustained. So in such a condition, today we are very lucky to host you. Could you please present your presentation today first? Then we will go for question and answer session. I would like to humbly request you to present your papers.
I will. Thank you for that. And before I present to you, I wanted to share some very important points, insight actually with you. That see, what's happening is, as you rightly pointed out, sustainability has to be the core. And see, now being on the other side of the coin, not just working, for organizations, also working internally to look at what is the data. So you will be pleasantly surprised to know that sustainability as not just an educational forum, sustainable workplace, sustainable corporations, every organization, whether you're in a corporate, let's say, whether you are working in fashion, whether you're owning a gym, or whether you're in fitness, all of the industries, regardless of which prototype they have originated from, are all now trying to create a new vertical, a new dimension which has sustainability to its core. So what is happening is that all of the big names, corporations, let's say Meta or Bill Gates or Melinda Gates Foundation, they're all realizing that the next 10 years of let's say corporate life or business development is only going to happen if we are able to align business output with sustainable measures. So it is not just actually, interestingly, of course, for educationists, it's very critical because we know the future. We look at facts. But even for the corporate world, it has become the number one important critical element because their brand identity depends on it. So 95% of the businesses in the last, I would say, 1.5 years are now trying to bring in, I've had the opportunity of counseling and working with a lot of corporates to give them a perspective of how to go into the sustainable work environment. How do we start from there, and then how do you create an ecosystem where you are able to create a sustainable workspace, and then how do you create a system where we talk about corporate responsibility projects. So educational institutions are definitely doing it, and as you rightly said, it's going to be it has to be a mass movement. I mean, the students alone have to be supported by the corporates. And the good news is that most of the big corporates have realized that now as you must have known, right? Till the pandemic, we had a massive edtech boom in countries like India, and it had a ripple effect all over the world. Interestingly, now statistics are speaking that more than 65% of investments across developing and developed nations are all moving towards projects which are aimed at sustainable form of life. Whether it's a person who invents a sustainable motorcycle which runs on electric power or batteries, whether there's a zero waste bakery, or so all of the investors are now looking to pull in capital into businesses that have a future, where they can see that, okay, there is a 10-year sustainability model which can actually practically work. So what I'll be sharing with you today is that I'll be taking you through the actual official United Nations 17 sustainable goals, and we'll be talking about them a little bit, which will give anyone who would be watching this a lot of insight into how critical it is to their life, and interestingly, how all these 17 are all interlinked to how we live. So education is one of them, but education is like a ripple effect. It connects to everything. So just bear with me. I'll share with you the official website that we use when we from the United Nations talk to our any of whenever we talk to any of the counterparts, that what are the sustainable development goals. So we're just going to play a short video. I hope it loads. Just bear with me for a second, and I think we should be able to get the audio on.
Could you please increase the sound?
Sorry?
It is not audible now.
It's not audible?
No, it is not audible. Could you please increase the sound?
Okay. Is there any setting where I probably can't play YouTube videos? Hang on, I have an idea. Just bear with me for a second. I'll just open it on YouTube separately and play it from there. Let me know if you get, because I'm playing it from the United Nations website. So I'm just going to play it again. Please let me know if it's audible now. Is it?
It is not audible till now.
Actually, the volume is full. Just a second. Just confirming, it's not audible to you?
No, it is not audible to me.
It's not audible. Okay.
Yeah, it's not audible.
Okay, so I think then there could be a possible setting in Zoom itself where video sound might be off. I'll have to check that. Not a problem. We'll come to the video later. We'll actually look at the actual 17 SDGs or sustainable goals. So, see, United Nations realized, as you know, quite some time back, that along with awareness programs or people talking about it, using wonderful channels like yours to spread the message, we also need to do practical work on ground. So the only way we can make sustainable, the only way we can kind of heal and save our planet is if practical outcome solutions come out. So factor is they're all in a web intellect. Mr. John, do let me know if my internet at any point gives you any trouble, because
No, it's all right. It's all right.
all right. So if I show you number one, we're looking at first. We'll just take a preview of zero. When we look at no poverty, right? I mean, it sounds very easy, but you won't believe that there are more than 1,161 projects and actions that the United Nations has spread worldwide within ending poverty. So, we hear about it a lot everywhere, but how much of it actually happens? And especially with countries like ours, India, Bangladesh, our neighbors, there's a lot that people are doing in our countries, but it's only happening in fragments. Like there are NGOs who might be working in one area. It's not happening as a collective movement. So one of the reasons when we talk about goals like no poverty, it can only happen when corporates and businesses also contribute. It cannot be done by few people in a corner. That's not going to be practically possible. It's a collective effort. So a lot of companies these days talk about CSR responsibilities. But under CSR responsibilities also now it's become more critical to start working on such goals. And I'll show you the interesting fact that now when you look at number two, it's zero hunger. These are all something that sound very common, but it's not still as a world we've been able to look at them with a very critical eye. When we look at good health and well-being, again for the developing nations, and I'm sad to even think about even the developed nations still. I mean, we've just gone through a series of pandemics, right? I'll just open one of them to show you how this interactive, page works. And of course, I'll be sharing this page with your department. You can please share it with anyone, and anyone can access this. They just have to go to the SDGs United Nations org and they'll find. So the number one goal right now in education is that we're looking at inclusive, equitable, quality education, and we're looking at lifelong learning opportunities for all. Now you will find that it's so interesting. See, if you look at these statistics, the COVID-19 pandemic has deepened the global learning crisis. More than 147 million children have missed over half in-person instruction. And the problem that has happened is in most of the developing countries, because of the pandemic, we used to have before something a cultural divide, probably, people who could afford private education, especially in developing countries where public education systems are not very successful. Because of the pandemic, the digital divide has increased immensely. So let's say a child who might be in a small township or a tier 4 city would not be able to afford the same edtech product that a child in tier 1 city from an upper middle class family can afford. So now the edtechs who have created a big, you can say a boom in the market, it is now their responsibility to work with the students in the public sector, with the government schools. For example, in countries like India, we've come up with something called National Education Policy 2020, which talks about all of these factors in theory. Now it's time for us to talk about it and in an outcome-based manner. And we have some statistics here that almost 24 million learners from pre-primary to university level never return to school. This is called GER, gross enrollment ratio. See, gross enrollment ratio is how many students are actually able to complete the whole cycle of education from pre-primary till university. And you will be surprised to know that based on our statistics and data, we are finding just in India itself that 42.5% students never cross high school. The dropout rate happens at grade 8. And that is the biggest challenge for countries like India also. And this can only be filled, and I'm being very, very pragmatic here, this can only be filled when private organizations which are running the educational system, ecosystem in countries like India, start supporting the public educational entities. See, the government does take out theoretical initiatives, but how many of them are applied and applicable is a gray area. So it is now the responsibility of private organizations to take part in making sure that the gross enrollment ratio comes back into a positive light. Because, countries like India where we have, I'll just show you the targets that we're looking at, just to give you a perspective. So we are looking at target number one. See, we're looking at by 2030, we want to ensure that all girls and boys complete free, equitable, quality primary and secondary education, leading to relevant and learning outcomes. So the number one problem that we're facing right now is that the data, yes, in developing countries does speak that girls are still having less opportunities at education, but you would find that when we talk about free, equitable, quality, this line is not yet at all close to even being achieved in developing countries. So the problem is quality primary and secondary education is in the hands of, I mean, to give you an example of the country where I live, right? So any person who has capital can open a school, right? Apply for a license. But how many of them are genuinely coming from an education background? You will find very few educationists in our country who are actually the owners of educational companies or group of schools or colleges. Most of them are, because it's a very lucrative business, and I hate to say this because I come from that side of the coin. So what happens is that we are not able to create a system where, I'll give you an example. The global index of the happiest countries was done sometime back by UN and Oxford University, and number one was Finland. Again, why? Because for the last 5 years, they have the number one education system in the world. And the education system has created the happiness index. That's the ripple effect. Because education is something that everyone is able to reach out to, and people are able to do what they want to do. Now, to give you some perspective, see why, if we look at 2022, where we are right, we are, the good thing is, what I would really like people to do is, please look at this page, and there are a lot of events that United Nations is posting right throughout the year. Whichever sustainable development goal you feel aligned to. I just showed you as an example quality education, but some of you might be very keen and interested in gender equality. Some of you who might be working in businesses related to clean water and sanitization might be interested in that. What we need to understand is that all of these 17 goals that you see in front of your screen are interlinked. To give you an example, if you want to reduce inequalities, that can only happen if you have an educated nation, right? If you want to reduce, if you want to promote gender equality, your educational outcome has to be of the kind of people that we're looking at in the future. And I'm talking about the future, which is right now. I'm not talking about 10 years from now. If you are looking at zero hunger, you need more private capital business owners to invest money into areas where equitable. So we use the word equitable. See, inclusion is very important. I want to just touch upon one point here. When we talk about education, inclusion is something that not only developing countries, Mr. Jonal, even developed countries are struggling with inclusive education. Now, equitable is still something that might be hard for developing countries, but inclusive means that, from my experience of the last, almost close to 18 years now, what we are facing as a problem is that we are not able to understand the students who are having learning difficulties. For example, most of our education systems are built in a way which are marks oriented or rank oriented. So what happens is we create an ecosystem in a classroom of competitive element, but is it healthy or unhealthy competitive element? Are we creating students who want to get a higher score because it's a societal ripple effect? Okay, if I get 98%, then I probably will get a placement into this college. If I get a placement into this college, I'll probably get this good high paying job. If I get this high paying job, then I can, so it's a life cycle of a person where they're always working towards the end result, but they're not going through the journey. That's one problem. So education systems have to rethink on the mark system. And the good news is a lot of the educational boards or curriculums have realized this. The good news that I saw, at least in theory, is that the national education policy here in India has also realized that marks-based or rote learning is not going to work. Because, see, the problem is, I'll just stop sharing my screen and I'll just give you a perspective. Now, having worked as a CEO, let's say, of an edtech company for a few years, when we hire people now, and how generally executives hire people, we don't look at the CV anymore. The CVs are not important. Qualifications are not important. Those are our theoretical, let's say, foundation. The problem is, are you able to convert the theoretical foundation into practical problem solving, growth mindset, innovative thinking? So the companies are saying simply that anything that I can Google. But can you use that knowledge to create something new, or can you use that knowledge to work towards a sustainability based future. Because unfortunately, that's where, or fortunately for that matter, that's where the whole world is heading. So if we are born and bred into a system where we have strong theoretical knowledge, but we lack what we call experiential learning, right? Hands-on learning. If we are not able to convert what's in our brain into an actual innovative idea, if we are born into a system which has created a fixed mindset, then our employability chances are going down. That is why you will see a ripple effect that in most of the, not just developing countries, now I'm talking about the whole world, innovators are simply people. It doesn't matter, again, we don't want to use stereotypes, but most of the recent founders, we said, okay, not all were dropouts from Harvard or wherever, but see, the idea was if you wanted to create something new, you focus. And apart from working with school children, I've been working with a lot of MBA students, a lot of students who are, studying post graduation in business, and they have amazing ideas. I mean, amazing, innovative ideas, but they need mentorship. So there is a fault on the other side also. When I say fault, as professors or educators, it's become a business transaction, unfortunately. We go into the classroom, we teach because we get paid, but we're not working as mentors anymore, or guides. We've lost that part of our, you can say, key responsibility area, KRA, when we get into classrooms. Now, this classroom could be anything right from a pre-primary to a university lecture hall. But the problem is students are not connecting with their educators anymore, simply because the educators are not able to put themselves in the shoes of the students. So the problem is cultural, social, and I would say even to an extent, uh, the emotional well-being of the child. There's a massive disconnect between the educator and the student. So when we talk about inclusive education, it is not just about what we just spoke. It is also about students who are born with special education needs. That's an area you won't believe. In the last almost 9 years, I've been focusing a lot on this, because students who are born under this, students in our countries, even in the United States, we're still not able to identify properly if a child is autistic, to what level, if a child is dyslexic, if a child is born with ADHD. I had to actually go back to college while being a principal of a school, because I realized that even my own knowledge was limited. So I had to do my post graduation from Harvard into special education needs, because I realized that that area is very weak in countries like ours, because we are just putting the students into the same classroom. Whereas what they need is something what we call the IEP, an individualized education program, differentiation. And it doesn't apply just to students with learning difficulties. It applies to all kinds of students. How can we ever expect that two students can learn in the same way? It's not possible. So unless we are able to upscale the teachers, so that brings me to the next goal of sustainability. See, sustainability is linked to also the quality of our educators. And it is also linked to the factor for any country that quality education doesn't mean that how do we attract young people to get into the field of education? The number one problem that we are facing, not just in developing countries, but even back in Europe or the UK, is that most of the people who are of, let's say, mid 20s to late 30s do not want to get into education because they find it's not inspiring or innovative enough. And that's a true fact. So unless and until this generation, there is a more transfer of this generation into the education field, uh, you will find it hard, because see, people who've been teaching mathematics, let's say, in the same way for the last 35 years, they're really excellent professors, but they do not have the capability now to change. Unlearning and relearning, evolving, metamorphosis is the need of the hour. If we really want our students to have a multi-dimensional perspective of what they are being taught. So that's something that I'm very, I would say, not worried, but I'm very concerned and very sensitive about when we talk about inclusive education and when we talk about the future of sustainability. So, any questions, Mr. Jonil, from your end before we talk further that you like to ask?
Actually, you have covered lots of issues and very concrete, very timely issues you have discussed on SDG Goal 1. Then you come up with SDG Goal 4, where you have rightly pointed out that 42.7% of our students never cross higher secondary level or high school. So this is the point where is the student are not capable or intellectual enough to cross the high school level, or they are not doing so due to poverty, they are not doing so due to lack of infrastructural facilities in their society. So if
No,
it is so,
yeah, it's a good question. That's a very good question. Actually, it's not the student's fault. Just give me a second. I would like to share some data and some statistics with you. Just give me 1 second. Hopefully, we'll be able to share my screen. Just a second. Okay. Just bear with me, please. So while working as the CEO of one of my companies in India, tech companies, I had written a research paper on the very topic that you're actually talking about. So I wanted to share with you something very important. Just if I can find the right presentation. Just give me a second. So while I am just looking for the presentation, the answer is absolutely no. It's not the students who are not wanting to learn. In fact, it's not that they're intellectually not gifted. The problem is there are certain factors that are inhibiting those students to get a chance. Sure, just give me a second. I'll got my presentation here. I wanted to share some data with you. Okay. Yeah, so I'm just going to open my presentation and actually answer the question through that PowerPoint presentation, because that should give you a good perspective on what I'm actually trying to talk about, right? Yeah. Right. So the reasons why students are dropping out. Let me share my screen, and let me know if my screen is visible to you.
yes, it's visible.
Okay. So this is very important to understand. See, when I did the analysis of the national, I did actually, this is one of the companies where I was working as the CEO. So I did a massive research paper, and then I created the whole research paper into a presentation because I had to speak to a lot of government officials about this data that I had gathered over a few years. So I was looking at current enrollment numbers. What are the causes of dropout? What are the solutions that I was thinking about? What is the business model that works? Apart from the business model, what I want to share with you is this stark data. See, when I was talking to you about gross enrollment ratio in India, right? So it tells us the number of students get enrolled into the education system against the number of students eligible to enroll. So if you look at senior secondary, the dropout rate that shoots up, and this is in millions, as I was telling you, it's almost touching 20 million, right? And when we are looking at this was a presentation which I had created in 2021 March after my research paper, and you can imagine this is at that point. This is a number that was out of the education system at that point, and this number, unfortunately, is only increasing. Can you imagine this many students? And again, I am sad to say that it's only increased. Now, the causes of why students are dropping out in countries like India. See, countries which have diverse backgrounds and cultural, factors, these factors have to be taken into account when we are uh, dealing with students. What I wanted to show you is that a lot of people in our country do not send girl child. To give you an example, we are sitting in tier one cities, sometimes talking about big massive projects, and we're working with Disney as edtech companies, and you're in the same country where we are still trying to save the female fetus from being killed at birth. So look at the amount of diversion within the same country. And 24% of the girl children are engaged in domestic activities. They're not allowed to go to school because the only reason they are there is because so that they can be good wives. 13% of boys do not go to school because if, let's say, I'm a shop owner and I've had the same shop in my family for the last 4 generations. As a parent, I've lost trust in the public education system because that's all I can afford. So I would rather put my kid, at my shop and let the shop run rather than send him to school. And this is a genuine fact. After this, the bigger sad part that I was talking to you about why private organizations have to take ownership or they have to understand is that almost 34% of the boys and 25% of the girls, because of genuine financial constraints, cannot afford quality education because simply it's not reachable. And I hate to take names here, but if I was to be a kid who is, in a village, very passionate, and I'm, as you pointed out, intellectually very strong, but I cannot afford Byju's if the lockdown is going on because I don't have the money. So unfortunately, my talent or my capabilities will never be seen because I am sitting in a remote part of the country where there is no possibility for me to financially buy an app which was designed for a price which I can't afford. But the starking information that I want to share with you is that almost 45% of male and 37% of female are not interested in education. Now, what I mean by not interested is um, there has been a massive failure in countries which have been under the colonial rule. Let's say, to give you, let's use India as a case study. So 100 years of rule, the public sector, the first, which is again a starking, shocking thing, the first national education policy by India was written in 1968. And after 1968, it took India till 2020 to revise the national education policy. Why students are not interested in education is very simple, because their last 4 generations or 5 generations have not been interested in education because education has not given them anything right. It's not given them employability. The public sector is not giving them the right kind of jobs, right? So the logic is, when we say, why are you not interested in going in class? It's because nobody motivates them. See, any government teacher is not interested in being a mentor. It's not their fault because they've not been trained that way. You have to, do your homework. Take 5 steps back. You will look at the B.Ed colleges, the bachelors of education. These are again areas that now the Indian government has realized that they were a failure for the last 25 years. The kind of teaching quality that we've taken out the last 25 years has been a failure. So it is a ripple effect. Educators are themselves not interested in being more than just mere transcribe of a textbook. If I have to just stand in a classroom and read a textbook and then go and get paid for it, obviously I'm not going to inspire a kid. The kid is going to try and do something else. And let me give you some interesting statistics. Let me see if I can share my screen one more time with you. So, see, when we talk about this kind of data, we have to also look at something very important. So, I had designed an educational framework. Just a second, if I can just talk to you about. So, this was an educational framework that I designed, which has been working very successfully all across the world. See, if you are a student who is genuinely an excellent chef or a tennis player, then why would you have to go through the complete cycle after this age, complete this whole thing, and then get a chance because you're already touching your late 20s or early 30s? You cannot pursue what we sometimes call passion. See, that's again equitable education. See, people who are innovators should be given an opportunity right here to, instead of going into senior secondary, get into vocational. And this is the model, educational framework model, that has been successful in countries like Finland. So rather than me, who's generally born as a gifted chef, I would rather put that kid into a vocational apprenticeship training program get them the right kind of work experience, and get them into that particular college of culinary arts where they can finish and get into either starting their own startup or working for one of the best, culinary organizations rather than this cycle. See, we have to break this cycle. The cycle is very simple. 85% of the students that I have seen do not know what career choices they want because nobody mentors them. Uh, when they do get mentorship, it is coming from all directions, where the parents would want something. So, what the parent wants versus what the child is good at is again been a debatable issue for many years now. But the good news is that finally, a lot of parents have started realizing that there is more to just becoming a doctor, engineer, or getting into IT. People are earning way more and are more successful in careers which could be liberal arts based, non-STEM based, performing arts based. It's just about knowing. So before we even talk about counseling the kids or educating, there has to be a big bracket of educating the parents. Mindset change will happen there. Only then you can see the dropout rate go down, because it's not the kids who are dropping out. It is the dissatisfaction of the parent who is sitting in a village somewhere for the last 35 years, seeing that the government has not been able to do anything. The private companies are not even touching them. So why would they want to send their kid to school when they can put them on the farm or in a shop? Because they have to earn a living. And they're being very practical. I respect that, because the system has failed. So if the system has failed them, then when we talk about sustainable education, that is one of the preambles of that. The system has to work together. That is why whenever I talk about education, I don't just talk about companies that own educational institutions. I talk about every successful organization that might be operating has a duty and a responsibility to support the educational framework, especially in developing countries which do not have the economical capital by themselves to be sustained. So that itself is sustainable living. See, when we talk about sustainable living, in countries where the poverty rate is still very high, governments do not have the capital. There, you have so many people who are, I mean, can you imagine that one of the richest people in the world is sitting in the country where I'm sitting right now, and still this country is one of the poorest countries in the world. So that gap, if is understood, would make a difference, Mr. John. And the problem is, see, we might talk about all of these things, but genuinely based on scientific data, it is just about 7 years left. The global temperature has risen by 1.5 degrees Celsius already, which is on the point of no return. It's already happened last year. That means the problems that we're facing in climate change now cannot go back, irreversible point. From here, it is only going to get worse. If by 2030, the polar ice caps will melt, right? So we will have 75% of the land mass on Earth under water, and then there will be mass evaporation because of the heat, and we will be a dry desert. And this is not some science fiction movie. This is pure hard scientific data, and this is happening minute by minute as we speak. And we love to talk about such things, but how many of us are on ground? That's my question. Over to you.
Thank you very much. You have given your utmost concentration to the quality of education, reach towards mass people, and not everybody should be a doctorate degree holder. They can contribute from polytechnic level, from vocational level, from different trade course level. You have rightly pointed out that Finland has the #1 education system of the world, and they are the happiest country of the world. So there is a correlation between the educational system and happiest country, being happy. Yes. So it is pointed out in the sustainable education goal, we have showed our target is to ensure inclusive, equitable, free primary and higher secondary education. In this line, I would like to request you to describe a little bit more on inclusiveness and equitable. These particular two words, what does these two words mean? and how we can ensure this inclusivity as well as equitability. Over to you, sir.
Sure. See, absolutely. And to start that point, I wanted to actually tell you that it is actually in the last 2 years during the pandemic that we realized that primary and pre-primary education was a big gap in the world, not just in India. We were neglecting uh, the actual foundation years from, and ironically, at the same time, we were trying to create coding masters at the age of 5, which is practically not possible. So the biggest challenge that we have seen now, I mean, if you look at even the media or the advertisements now, is we are trying to create children, we are actually taking away their childhood and bringing them into this version of, let's say, premeditated adulthood at an age which is not supposed to be the right age for that, which is a big problem across the world. I've been sitting in certain forums recently in an international forum where there was a debate going on between American, congresswomen and people from United Nations, and asked that how do you define a genius? So if a kid, one child can code at the age of 5, excellent. But why would you put that kind of pressure on an 5-year-old across? So, when we talk about the word, to answer your question, when we talk about equitable, it means fair and impartial. Means it has, when we talk about elements like no child left behind policy that was started back in the US, and in India it's called right to education. Every country has its name. And a lot of my colleagues were working actually back in Bangladesh. In fact, I was some years back supposed to come down to Bangladesh and head a school, but then the pandemic happened. But a lot of my colleagues are telling me about some very good practices that are happening even in Bangladesh. So not that I'm physically there, but what is happening is it has to start from the grassroots level. We always say from local to global. Equitability applies not only in a classroom where the teachers are creating what we call, when you look at a child, you cannot look at a class of 20 and say they are all the same. That's the biggest fault. Then, as an organization, if you expect the teachers to see every child equally, then as an owner, you need to see every teacher equally. See, if you talk about differentiation for children, what about differentiation for the teachers? How do you make sure that the professional development of the teachers is taken care of? How do you make sure that the teachers are inspired? How do you make sure that the teachers have equal pay, regardless of gender, regardless of, to give you a statistical data, pre-primary and primary age group has always been neglected for one reason: quality control. Why? Because people without experience have been hired there, because the thought process is these years are not important. Only when the child goes to 10th, 11th, 12th, then the real future is made. Unfortunately, if the foundation is broken, so the teachers who are actually unfortunately have been teaching for the last 50 odd years in pre-primary and primary are not qualified, because unfortunately the pay scales that the private schools are giving them, you can only afford people who might be freshers. And the same logic was used by the EdTech evolution. Most of the people that are called subject matter experts, and I always had a problem with this terminology. You cannot ever have someone called a subject matter expert. There is no subject matter expert. SME doesn't exist. How can somebody be an expert? 96% of the workforce, Mr. Jonel, in EdTech companies in India is run by college undergraduates who have never worked. And these are the kids who are actually writing the content, which has been then converted into massive, beautiful videos. But if somebody does an audit on the quality control of the content, you'll be shocked to see that there's a massive discrepancy. And in countries like ours, we never look at something called plagiarism. So the amount of copy pasting or originality of work is another area that nobody thinks about. So that's why the edtech industry, based on the data of 2022, more than 15 top 10 or unicorn edtech companies have either filed for bankruptcy or have shut down within the last 7 months. Simple reason, they had not created a projection that when the pandemic is over, then what are they going to do? See, during the pandemic, schools, when we talk about equitable education, during the pandemic, the schools were in a way dominated by edtech because schools had no choice. See, a private school owner needs the fee. EdTech companies are providing a solution with fancy videos and everything. So the parent says, okay, this looks good. You're not educating the parent. You never train the teacher to be empowered through technology. You try to replace the teacher with technology. So that never worked. And eventually the parents have realized that it doesn't work. Teacher is going to be the number one person in the child's life, not AI. AI is going to empower the teacher, support the teacher, take the teacher to the next level. It can never replace the human factor. So that's a big learning from the last 3 years from across the world, and this is something that we have all accepted. So equitable element has to be both sided. When I say both sided, from the side of the management, from the side of the teacher, and the ripple effect. See, if you treat an employee well, right, the employee will be inspired to make sure they try to give their best in their respective jobs, whether you're a teacher, whether you are working anywhere. Unfortunately, teachers in private systems are exploited, and this is not an area that I would dive too much into, but it's a fact. It is a fact, and we never go into the area of how much is the dropout or attrition rate of teachers leaving their jobs. What's the burnout rate? We always talk about the burnout rate in IT or corporate, but we don't look at the burnout rate in education, or the amount of stress that teachers go under, or the amount of stress they've just gone through for the last 3 years. So they actually have been the unsung heroes of the pandemic. Because for the first time, the millennial parent was left alone in a room with a child, and then they realized that the only person they could turn to was a teacher. So at the end of the day, inclusive means making sure that if the child is special needs child, the child has learning difficulties, whether they are by birth or by learning, whether the workspace is, what we call, everyone wants to be called these as the best workspace, but how do you create the ecosystem of your work style? That is important. So both of these terms are very critical to sustainable form of not just living, but workspace and education.
Sir, thank you. Thank you very much. You have pointed out another very important area where the teachers should be the motivator. Teachers should be the mentor. Teachers should be the guide. Teachers should be the idol of a student. Not the technology, not the fancy videos, not the AI things. So
yeah, that's just like me watching a movie, Mr. John Hill. So I mean,
yeah,
for a while we were very fascinated by it. I mean, having worked in edtech and seen the whole process, of course, it's beautifully fascinating. My only question is, I want that the same quality control of academia should come into technology. You
yeah,
cannot just bypass the quality of academia by using fancy technology. So as you rightly said, that has been my area of contention when it comes to edtech. And being working with edtech, I want that now. I think it's a wake up call for all of the edtech companies. They realize that quality, without quality control, without the support of teachers, it is not possible to move forward. That's why
yes,
80% of the edtechs in India are actually going offline or going into hybrid modes.
yes.
They would have never thought. Look at the cycle. They went. They were the ones who created the education technology. Now they're trying to open schools.
Yes, this is number one. Secondly, I would like to draw your attention to your previous discussion that it is not educational background, not the script, the mark sheet, not the certificate who can ensure your intellectual capability. Whether you are capable to use a theory, to use the connotation or the guidance of a theory in your practical life problem solving. When you are a decision maker, you are a manager, you are a CEO, or you are a CFO, you are a COO, you have to know how to solve your daily problem facing by your company, by your department, by
Yeah.
your subordinates. So you have to guide them how to solve their daily problems, not what is written in the novel or what is written in the
No,
book.
absolutely, absolutely.
So, so
I'll
how?
just yeah, that's a very valid point from you. I wanted to actually let me see if I can find that slide. See, there are two kinds of people: one, fixed mindset, and growth mindset. I mentioned that to you today, some time back, right? The number one problem that we face with people who are CEOs, CFOs, or CTOs, or CEOs is they lack what we call people skills. And people skill is something that is not taught at all. And we think that people skills is something that is by default inside us. No, it's not. Leadership skill is actually people skill. People skill has verticals into communication, interpersonal. We call it MI, multiple intelligence. Based on our temperaments, we have certain faculties which we are born with, certain we have to learn. But if we don't have people skills as leaders, we will not be able to lead any kind of process, vertical, team, or unit. See, we don't live in the boss mentality world anymore, where a person sitting on a chair will tell you, okay, do this, otherwise, goodbye. Now we are living in the age, if you do that, the person simply leaves. Nobody is interested in toxic work cultures. Most of the people, why do we hear the news all the time about toxic work cultures? Because people have realized it's time to speak against it. The pandemic has shown us how fragile or easily perishable is the human life. Therefore, quality of life versus work life. So people have realized that the balance is important. That's where the leaders come in. So leaders can only be successful if they genuinely have what we call a growth mindset under the umbrella of people skills. And people skills are actually what we call problem solving. So instead of having that mentality that because I have a hierarchy and I am above you, I can tell you what to do and you have to do it no matter what, that never works. That cycle always fails. Rather than working with the person, you're telling the person what to do. Still, because of the manufacture of privatization, slowly this is changing, but it is something that we need. You talked about equitable, right? This is one of the equitable elements. As a leader, you have to work with your team, not always expect results. I'll give you a simple example. If you were in the military and you were the officer and you had, let's say, 20 or 40 people who you were supposed to lead into battle, or 100 people, why would they follow you unless and until you could inspire them first to actually believe that you could win? So I'm not taking this example from a very purest form of view that, military tactics are right. No, I'm just saying that leaders technically have to be the first persons to face the problem and come up with the solution and work with the team. Innovation. Rather than just giving out orders, that system is defunct. It doesn't work anymore. So it is very important to have a growth mindset. Most of the successful entrepreneurs of our, I would say, last 10 years have been people who create a work culture where they're always seen as part of the team. Even if those companies have turnaround like Facebook or something, they still work as if they're part of the team. That's how the companies grow. So I think that might cover what you were trying to ask me.
Well, actually, this is another area. You have also rightly pointed out that individualized education program, IEP. Could you please explain a little bit more about it?
Yeah, sure. See, IEP is nothing but looking at the strengths, weaknesses, and mapping it according to the child's actual capacity rather than the curriculum. What I mean by that is, you cannot expect the book or whatever you're teaching, lesson plan or whatever, to be absorbed by the 20 or 30 children sitting in your class in the exact same way. Some people use the WAC model, like visual. Some learners are visual, some auditory, some are kinesthetic. That's just a very small model. Now it's massive. The point that I'm trying to make is that the teachers have to do the hard work which is a genuine hard work, which makes the classroom more interesting, in making sure differentiation happens. Differentiation means that if 5 children are exceeding expectations, 5 are, let's say, in an area where they need support on that same topic, you have to approach the class in a different way. An IEP, individualized education program, really works for students with learning needs, because then you can identify. See, I'll give you an example. A lot of children who might be autistic are extremely good in technical, IT, and mathematical skills. So we have to work on that strength. We cannot neglect that. If we work on that strength, you will see that they're excellent with numbers. But if we fail to recognize that, for example, if you have a kid in your class and you're teaching them algebra, but the child is an excellent drummer, what is the point of the child learning algebra for 10 years in mathematics? Because eventually, um, either the child will rebel and anyways become a future drummer in the world, or might end up in a job where they'll be sad for the next 20 years and then leave the job at the age of 40 and then become a drummer. So it is a job of the educator. See, I always say that educators are more critical than doctors. We go to doctors only when we are in problem. But one word of an educator can make and break a child's life. Because if you are genuinely a passionate educator, children look out towards you as a guide. So if you are a drummer, let that child be a drummer. Along with that, whatever requirements are there for that state or for that country to fulfill, yes, but don't take away that passion and convert it into a skill, rather than killing that passion and forcing mathematics down that child's throat. That's in a nutshell IB. IB means work on the strengths and the skills of the children, convert them into practical outcome-based measures, and make sure that the areas that they're dropping down on, we can give them scaffolding. Scaffolding means we'll have to work with a mix. So that is why I always say teaching and co-teaching is important. You cannot have one person to run a successful classroom anymore, because differentiation can only happen. Differentiation is like how you see a wavelength, right? There is no flat line. Every kid will absorb your content in a different way. So you have to do the homework as a teacher to understand, okay, how do I make sure that my lesson is successful? So lesson planning in itself is an art, which I'm happy to say that at least I'm seeing 10 to 15 to 20% of the teaching population now realizing that. So that's another very important factor, which I wanted to tell. So as I told you, IEP is nothing but you cannot let go of the. If you are a teacher and you don't know what the child is actually good at, then you're not doing your job. That means you're not fit for that job. Just picking up book and teaching the curriculum, conducting an examination and passing the kid, that's not a teacher. You've got to work on the skills. So as you said, skills and sustainability go hand in hand. They're directly proportional to each other.
So in such case, you are suggesting that a student should allow to follow his passion, not the passion of the parents, not the passion of the society.
Yeah. So I'm not against passion of the parents if the passion of the parents is realistic. See, and also passion alone is not enough. Passion has to be converted into an actual skill. That's showed you that if someone is genuinely good at, it has to start as a foundation from an early age. Let's say I genuinely love music. I'll give you my own story. I was always interested in music. So at the age of 6, I was trained on the classic piano. I did my bachelor's in sound engineering, did my master's in music production, because I was genuinely interested in music. And I was interested in the the science of sound, music, you can call it, apart from instrumentation. So my logic was very clear. I wanted to understand something in that particular way. And there are all kinds of kids who want to do different things. But if you only treat them like how you would say a herd mentality, that everyone will learn or will give you the output in the same way, then you cannot do IEPs. And parents' dreams, I have no problem against that. See, if the parents have realized that the child is really good at something, and you to counter that point, you will find so many parents now actually supporting the child's passion, right, and trying to convert it into an actual career pathway. But this is a very micro community of parents, which can do that. Majority of them are not aware of it. See, that's where education has another wing. I told you that teaching, training, and counseling and exposing the parents is as important as the child. Because the child is coming to the school, it's our responsibility that the parents actually know where the children stand. Our report cards that we show don't often show these things.
Yes, it's all right that one teacher, he should identify what is the ability of a particular student. If he can absorb one page of XYZ subject, then he should be limited himself in one page, not the curriculum. Which part of the
Because
which
if you
lesson
think
should be
about
taught?
it, yes, absolutely, Mr. John. If you think about it practically, will the curriculum, let's say I studied physics, chemistry, and biology, but I never had interest in biology. I ended up, anyways, going into music. Now the whole life went by. Did I touch biology even once? No. Then why force that child to take biology? So the logic is there is always this, back in the 80s, it was if the child would do wrong, the parent would still listen to the teacher, whatever counseling they would give, whether if it's even if it's for maths and science. But now the system is different. When a child is wrong, the parent shouts at the teacher or the school that I'm paying money, fix my kid. So it's like, that's what I told you. It's become a client relationship, client servicing industry
Yeah,
rather than
yeah,
an education industry. That is very important that the value of the educator cannot come from just the educator. The parent also is part of it.
yes. So actually, I would like to draw your attention to another field of education, that with the development of science and technology, every year technology changes its dimension. Therefore, 10 years before, while a graduate enter into the job market with a particular occupational skill, now it became obsolete. So he had to learn a new skill, what is replacing that the older version of it. So in such case, unlearning and relearning, you have earlier mentioned, is very important. Could you please just discuss a little bit more on unlearning and relearning?
Absolutely. See, learning, first of all, has to be a continuous process. So I'll just something that we call to the fact that it's not been a day gone by in my life that I have stopped learning. See, the day, especially for people who are in education, the day you say you know it all, that's the day you stop being an educator. The simple answer to this is something what we call continuing education, CE. Continuing education is also applicable for working professionals. And let me just lower, just bear with me for a second. I'll just show you how I designed the continuing education process and why this is something that we need to develop universally. Just bear with me for a second, please. I'll just open the presentation and show you. Right. So, right. I'm just going to share my screen and give you a perspective of what and how we can keep pace if we are always learning. See, if we have models of learning which are evolving with the models of the times, we will not be extinct as a species. So continuing education basically means, if you look at this quote by the Google CEO, that rather than thinking of education as an opening act, we need to make sure it's a constant, natural, and simple act across life with lightweight, flexible courses, programs available to everyone. So it has to be education should not be taken as a terminology. Now I finished college, I'm at work. Actually, to give you some statistics, you will be shocked to see. These are some skills report, which I don't want to bore you with, but I'm just going to show you this. Employability of Indian graduates, according to the Indian Skill Report, February 2021. In 2021, only 45.9% of the countries actually employable. So can you imagine the majority of the country is actually unemployable? And this is because of what you just said. They have to keep up with the upscaling factor, unlearning and relearning. And if I take you into the data, by 2021, this is the employable talent available according to the college courses. And all of these people are not just a target audience for continuing education. It is also chances of promotion, whether you're in a job. I'll give you my own example. I was always interested in studying medicine. I could not. But when I got a chance while being a principal, I give an example of studying special education needs postgraduate diploma online as a continuing education from Harvard Medical School. I realized that I was learning. And you won't believe, ever since that time till today, I have not stopped learning. Whenever I see that there is a new thing that is happening or there's a gap in my own understanding, I straight away would learn. So continuing education is very important, whether you're doing career transition, you wanting to get a hike, you want to improve your, as you rightly said, unlearning, your marketability, personal development, and of course, lifestyle. So this is again a project that I had created where I realized that continuing education cannot just happen by one university or one type. Continuing education basically means that people who are industry experts need to connect with people who need those skills. So, like when I mentor MBA students who are just about to get into jobs, my job is to train them for the industry. So, I'm an industry mentor. So, it depends on which point of life you meet the trainee versus the trainer. But continuing education is very important, whichever field you're working in or you want to work in, it has to go on. And we should never be worried by the term education. It is learning, because as a human being, that is what we are here to do, learn. And if we realize this is not the thing, as you rightly said, unlearn and relearn, evolve. If evolution stops, then we are in a problem. I meant learning evolution, of course.
So thank you. Unlearning as well as relearning is important to keep you fit in the market. Otherwise,
Yes,
your
yes.
skills, your existing skills may be unlearning as well as relearning is important to keep you updated, keep you fit in the current position. Otherwise, your previous skill may be obsoleted, may be irrelevant for your current job. So continuous education or continuous
Yeah.
learning is very important. Sir, I would like to draw your kind attention to a
Yes.
very practical issue that in Bangladesh, we are facing one problem that is every year 6 million graduates are going into the market. 2 million fresh higher educated graduates, they are entering into market every year. Existing 4 million unemployed already graduates, they are there. So 6 million. Out of this 6 million, hardly we can employ 3 lakhs in government education, government job, 6 lakhs in private job, 3 lakhs in going abroad for job. Rest of them are again becoming unemployed. So this is the condition how tough to manage a job, a placement is. On the other hand, our private sector, for example, ready-made garments industry, pharmaceutical, leather and leather goods, plastics, agro processing, every private entrepreneur, if you ask them, they will say, yes, I am ready to expand my factory, but I am not getting the quality stuff. I mean, the skill level, the skill manager, the skilled workers. So one hand is thriving for skills, another hand is going out in from the education and they are trying to get the job, they are not getting the job. So what is missing there? Where is the missing point according to you?
See, I would say the missing point is still, if you balance it, it's still towards the gap that you see between the knowledge acquired versus the skill required. See, knowledge acquired versus the skill required. So what happens is we in our minds think that we know what we have to do. However, by the time we get out into the from the theoretical world of the universities or to the practical world of the capitalist economy, we are expected to perform certain skill sets. We have to have certain expertise. We have to have certain KPIs, key performance indicators that show that we are able to do certain things. So, as an employee, or even for a guy who might start a startup, we should never think that startups are, always successful. If I give you the data, 98% would fall and 2% succeed after 6 months of starting a startup. That's the burnout rate. So the point is, expectation versus reality for students is set up in the ecosystem, which is a combination of what's happening at home, what's happening at school, what's happening in the child's socio-emotional life, who are they with, do they actually have, see, you don't have always, the interesting study is that you don't have to always look for mentors into adults. Mentors could be your classmates. Why schooling has been successful so far, it might not teach you the right educational skills, but it still teaches you what we call SEL, social emotional learning. That part is still coming from our schools and colleges because we are interacting with our peers. And a lot of them end up encouraging us or inspiring us or making us think in the right direction. So, but the problem still happens is the industry is looking for clinical skills, some specific expertise. What we might be teaching in the university, like to give you an example, most of the universities, even till this date, I contest this question that rather than doing case studies, which might have been done, which are excellent, do the case studies on the actual industry that the kid is going to go into, rather than the industry case study of an industry that you might have picked up from 1994, which was an excellent case study, but this is not 1994, this is 2022. So how I teach kids case studies, I take them through my own, like for example, I showed you certain presentation. So I would actually take them through an investor's pitch that I prepared as a company CEO, and what was the outcome? Why did the pitch fail, or why did the pitch succeed, or what was the outcome? So they get practical perspective of what's happening in the pulse of the industry, rather than get only theoretical case study based information. Because what happens is they have information, but the information sometimes is redundant to the requirement of the industry. If you don't catch the pulse of the industry, you are not going to be employable. That's why I always tell people, please work along with studying. If you are in a college, you need to have internships, or every smart kid these days knows that 50% comes from college or school, 50% is life skill. If I don't work, I'm not going to pick that. So the street smart element is very important, along with, let's say, innovation and theoretical knowledge. A lot of street smart, educated kids are much more in a chance to get a job, rather than a kid who might even be a Harvard graduate but still lacks the practicality of how to bring out the right output. So working along with studying, very important. Very important. Why do we? I even encourage school kids, high school kids, always pick up internships, get into conferences. Why do we talk about MUNs and all of these practical elements? Because we want the kids to know the reality of what's happening, what they have read. Now join the book. Then you can solve the puzzle and be employable in the industry.
Thank you very much. You have rightly identified that there is a gap between the knowledge acquired by the graduates as well as the skills required in the factories. So your recommendation is to go for an industrial attachment, an internship. Summer vacation is going on, please you can work in a factory, in a company to understand what is going on there. So this should be the flexible system of education, as well as they have a relationship between education as well as in the practical field, the industry. So, sir, you have made a comment about the toxic work environment. Could you please describe a little bit when a work environment became toxic? Who are responsible for that? And what is the responsibility of a professional or a boss or a leader to remove toxic elements from the environment, work environment?
You mean the toxic elements?
Yeah, toxic working environment.
Right. See, toxic working environment can always be simply removed by one simple system that I always tell organizations. Do not be people-based, be process-based. That means when we spoke about equality or equitable skills, when you create salary slabs, promotions, you should go by productivity. First thing that we have to learn is in this age, You might be working for 12 hours, but your actual productivity might be 2 hours. So when I first of all talk about productivity versus time, productivity matters. Gone are the days where you have to wear on your chest the badge that I've been working for 14 hours, that makes me the employee of the month. No. If your actual output was for just 4 hours and the other guy who might have just worked 5 hours gave 100% output of 5 hours. So I would choose that guy. First thing we need to understand as bosses or leaders or people of company owners is that uh, we cannot treat our employees as dispensable elements to be stretched. First of all, smart hiring. We have to understand that the image of our organization eventually will fall if our attrition rate is very, very, very high. That means people work for 4 months, 5 months, and then leave. Then it is so important for a business owner or the board to do a case study on themselves and understand why are people leaving. Here comes the important role of the human resource department. One of the departments which is very undermined in all industries is the human resource department. Human resource department mostly is nothing but the face of the management. So far, it has to be an equilibrium between looking at the employees' needs, balancing that, and looking at what the management's expectations are from different verticals or different team heads. Human resource department is one of the departments that is not understood properly. We think that they are only in the organization for hiring or looking at biometrics. No, they are actually there to create the work culture. They are actually there to make sure that the employees are motivated to A, avoid any misunderstanding between the management and the employee, B, to create that atmosphere where the employees want to stay with you. So you as an organization, for a boss or a leader or an owner, you have to have what we call a pathway for an employee. And a lot of companies do create theoretical pathways or growth pathways that we call. But growth pathways have to be followed up. So performance-based growth is very important. When I told you person-based approach versus process means process speaks for itself. Person is you like someone, so you take the bias of probably promoting them, or for any other personal reasons you might give someone preference. Then it compromises or contradicts the factor that you're a leader. Process based approach does not allow that because process is defined. Then what happens is the organization functions as a smooth organism. Organism means it's a breathing organism. Everyone's output is measured based on what is their key performance indicators. Based on that, promotions, hikes happen. But this can only happen if you have a strong HR department, not one HR. People under invest in human resource, thinking that their job is just to do clerical work. It's not. In most of the successful companies, let's say like Amazon or any other names that I might take, it is actually the strong human resource people who are able to develop good employees, bring them, which is talent search, train them into the right directions, and how do we take them further to become leaders in that company. So my answer to you would be people have to relook at human resource. People also have to understand that toxic work cultures are simply created when you start treating employees just as a dispensable element. They are human beings. So the human factor has to come. And there's only one word for that. It's called empathy and compassion. So we live in a world where we have to have reverence, resilience, and compassion. Without these three things, we cannot be successful leaders. So it is important that if someone genuinely has needs or genuine concerns, yes, by all means investigate, but be empathetic. See, we do not want leaders in the future. To give you an example, you're living in a world where the pandemic is just slowed down and two developed countries are at war for the last good part of the year. So if this is the kind of world leaders that we are looking for, or you're looking at a world leader, the ex-president of one of the most powerful countries in the world, the United States, Mr. Donald Trump said, and I quote, that global warming is a myth. He believes it's fake. So if these are the kind of leaders that we are counting on, you can imagine the kind of schooling he might have had. He would have gone to the best of schools and colleges. But at the end of the day, if these statements are heard, and the kind of wars that we are seeing in this age that we are living in, it speaks about poor education that that person might have received during their early years, and it also talks about, in a nutshell, I'm using this as an example to talk about toxic work culture. It can happen in government offices, it can happen in private offices.
So my final question for this session, maybe we'll talk later on as well. Final question to you. You have mentioned the employability of Indian graduates. So what is employability? How a particular curriculum or education system could make more employable? Uh, and what is the parameters, how we can ensure optimum level of employability in education system?
See, employability is something that should not be procrastinated for, especially when we're talking about graduates or college students, right? The biggest enemy of employability is procrastination. Procrastination in the sense that we are waiting for that particular day to come when I will be either successful. I'm talking about from both the perspectives. Universities are waiting for the day when the companies are going to come and hire the ones that they want. Students are waiting for the day when they finally will work for some years and then get promotion. Procrastination is the biggest enemy of humankind in general. When we think that it is going to come, it never comes. So the number one thing that employability means, for universities to be successful, they have to be industry embedded. They have to, as I was telling you before, not just teach elements which are redundant, teach elements which are practical to the university kid now. For the university child, it is very important to make sure that not put all your eggs in one basket, that the university, now that I've joined, now I am 100% sure I'll get the best job. No. You have to be smart to work and to understand that, okay, if I've learned something today in the classroom, let me go and apply it at work and see, does it actually work? So how do I check? Like, see, as a scientist, when you come, why do you come up with a hypothesis? You need to check if what you're making is correct or not. Then how can you as a student expect to wait till the end of the university and then apply your knowledge and check whether do that? So you have a golden ticket, a golden window when you're studying in higher education to check on your own skill sets by experimenting, by working into different areas and realizing where you fit, right? So I always told you, passion versus skills. I might want to be an astronaut, but if I don't have the skill set, I can't be an astronaut. So realistic goals are important. Dreams without ideas will only stay dreams. It's very simple logic.
So thank you. Thank you very much. Dear audience, today we are very delighted that we have listened to so many important elements, so many important issues, concepts to make education sustainable. We started with the sustainable development goal, and we come up a solution that the world will not be able to achieve sustainable development goal if only government works there. Not the government, not the private sector self or alone can do it. The government, multinational forums like UN and other multinational bodies, as well as the private sector, the corporates, have to work together to achieve the sustainable development goal. Our today's resource person was mentioning that every successful company should lead a quality school to ensure that everybody can enroll, can complete their education free of cost, so that the inclusiveness will be ensured. Inclusiveness among the society people, not the lower class, not the middle class, not the higher class. We have to make everybody together, inclusive one. And today's resource person was also emphasizing upon equitable education, higher education, and he was discussing about the skills required to be employable. He was discussing about individualized education programs, IEP. He was discussing about the unlearning and relearning issues of our every professional life, why it is required, because I had a skill set, but now it is obsoleted. So if I am not always with the learning, relearning every day, then I will be backdated. So to keep me updated, keep me relevant for current corporate arena, I have to learn every day. He was emphasizing upon not the AI, but the teacher should be the main leader in the classroom to ensure quality education, sustainable education. So thank you very much, sir, for joining us in Meet the Expert session of Developing Bangladesh today. Hopefully, we'll be listening from you maybe on another topic, another day. Till that, stay happy, stay blessed. Thank you very much for
Thank,
joining.
thank you so much for having me. It was a wonderful session, and again, I would like to congratulate you for creating this awareness. And I hope people are tuned, and I'm sure people would benefit from these discussions. Thank you again for having me. Thank you.